Hello everyone. Today's video is on weathering a U-boat. This is a Type 7C 1/72nd scale U-boat by Revell. And it's just built. I've just painted it. Um, it's got the base colors on it. And I've had several comments in my videos about references for how I go by doing this, and they would ask what would be a good reference, and I tried to reply to them, but I thought I'd make a little video and hope this helps. What I basically started out with was Squadron Signals um, U-boat book. It covered all the U-boats. It was like a thin booklet. And then I got some U-boat books from overseas. I think they were done in Polish and in Poland. And then I got the English versions, and they had the Type 7s and the Type 9. Very nice books. And then there was a Japanese books. They were about 11 by maybe 10 by 12 inch square books and about a 1/4 inch thick. But one of the best places I found was just typing in Type 7 U-boat or German U-boat into Google, and then hitting images and finding real pictures from World War II of them in the docks and in the repair yards and stuff like that, and looking at the pictures and studying them. Another one was there's tons and tons of U-boat videos out there on YouTube where people put the weather jobs on them really heavy. I'm not much of a heavy weatherer. I sort of like light weathering, but I thought I'd give it a go. One of the things I use is I use this Microlux paint that's this is grimy black, and then I use Vallejo's dark rust and light rust. And then this is a polyester locomotive gray color. And what I do is I got a whole bunch of these tattoo ink cups. It's not going to show up too well, but anyway, they make them either with the rim on top, or they have them for stability with the rim on the bottom. And what I do is I put a little bit of paint, 2 or 3 drops of paint in there, and then I put 2 or 3 drops of water to thin it out to make like a wash. And then I try to use a very fine point brush. And what I'm basically doing is just putting a rust wash on them, or a black grimy wash. And I usually dry it off on the towel before I even hit the model. But sometimes to get that color in, let's see if I can do it right where you guys can see. I just hit around here, and it's a very light stain, and it takes a little while to dry, and then you start to see it after 2 or 3 applications of it. So I don't know if it's even showing up yet or not. I've got 3 lights on here, so I'm trying to make it bright enough. But even up here at these rivets, you either start up here on the hull, and then they run down with that. And don't get too upset, because if you just hit with the brush on a piece of paper, come back, it just looks like a stained wash. And then the rust will always run down to the next protruding item from a hull and build up, and then drip down. And then you can come over here and just hit the rivets lightly down to here. It'll build up, come down, and then run thin again toward the bottom. Then you go back and hit the ones you've done. And it takes 2 or 3 times at it, and you can build it up the amount that you want. But on these hull vents for when they dive, I try to put it all the way across there, and then have an area where it'll come down. And that way, there, underneath that top deck, when they take the top deck off to run maintenance on the inner hull tube is what's covered by this outer hull that has all the shapes you see. And then, as they repair things and pack glands with grease and new seals and change out whatever is in there, there's workmen in there with greasy boots and wrenches and oil and everything else, and they don't go around just cleaning it up over and over and over. So a lot of stuff washes out of there, and then being in salt water, it naturally is going to come out with the water going in and out and dives and stuff like that. And then people just walking around and working on things and dropping things will cause paint to chip and rust to start forming. See if I usually like to try to get like 2 and then work my way down. And yeah, there'll be areas where there won't be anything in here because the paint is either really good in that spot or whatever, but it's just not 100% all the way up and down it. And then like on the dive planes, you'll see a big bolt out here, and where everything would have a turning point, that causes friction, which would cause the rust to form as the paint breaks up. And some of it will be a lot heavier, some of it will be a lot lighter. And then you keep going back over it and building it up to where you like it. and that's basically, as far as rust buildup, is one of the ways to do it. Now let me see if I can move this thing up a bit and see if I can't concentrate a little bit on the if I can't get a little more light there. So where the railing joins up with the conning tower, that's a weld, and they don't go in there and clean it off. And today, when they weld, they usually go right behind the weld with a powder that covers the weld to keep oxygen from hitting it. So back in these days, they didn't do that. So rust started forming almost immediately, and it would cause any kind of joint like that that gets welded to be a rust spot. And that would probably be all of them. And that rust would spread. Anywhere there was a joint. And like I said, the rust would start in somewhere where the paint came off, and then it would form and run, and it would be on top of the paint even, so that it would show up on the paint. And then you can just take your brush and go back and hit a real small area to be heavier. While then you have the faded part that's going out to the sides. Sorry about my hand shaking so much, but I'm on a flimsy board and I'm not getting a lot of support. But this is giving you an idea. Now, I build these models and I paint most of it, and then I'll go back and add things like the grab rails and stuff like that, and go in with a real fine micro brush like I'm using, and take some gray paint and paint them and then weather them at that point. But I noticed in several, I've done 5 or 6 U-boats, and a lot of the comments read that, you know, what's a good reference and how do you start? And some of the guys have even said, I'm a little afraid to even start. And so was I, but then I got to thinking about it one day, and I thought, well, you know, after looking at all these pictures and seeing that everything was never alike from boat to boat, that these things were so different that no matter what you did, and no matter what you thought, well, like, oh my God, this looks bad. But if you looked at enough pictures, you saw something like that. So, like I said, it's just one of those things that you can't be afraid of it, because of the mere fact that nothing was ever the same from boat to boat. And let's see if I can get a little paint here for the grimy. Add some water to it. Let's see what this does. So on the grimy part for the black, for anything that would be like knocking the paint off to the little rivet heads, I try to get it as light as I can, and then try to I just want a little bit of black to show up on them. Just a tiny bit. And that means you've got that harder to do this than it is the rust. Like I said, okay, so you think, well, that doesn't look right. But believe me, when you look at enough painting or enough pictures, you see the paint gets knocked off where they go into a dock or something. And you can't tell me that there wasn't a U-boat that's somewhere on it, where the underlying primer didn't come through the outer gray because something was between the two layers that caused the light gray paint to come off. And then with the salt water, which actually just eats and destroys everything, no telling how it would look. I mean, I've even seen U-boats that would have a picture and then right here, there might be like a check mark. Like that. And it's like, okay, what caused that? Well, you can't think about what caused it. It just happened. That could actually be grease or grime from them working on it. And depending upon how many times, I would think that after every patrol, these things came back and had maintenance performed on them. And then maybe like if they were lucky enough to survive 3 or 4 patrols, they probably came in and scrubbed them down as best they could and repainted them. And then the surface underneath would not be perfect. And then it would cause stuff to come off or bleed through or whatever. So it's one of those things that you never know what's going to happen. Like I said, this boat's nowhere near finished. I'm just using it. And then I'll get a lot of water on this, wash it off. And now with it wet, now I've got it to a point where I sort of like that one. Oops, that wasn't even in the picture, so sorry. But that second one is something that you cannot tell me was or was not a part of a U-boat. And then also too, sometimes out of these ports came a grime that was even probably heavier than the rust. See if I can pick one here. And then say you don't like that one and you think, oh goodness. Well, then if you go back and hit it with 2 or 3 coats of like thin rust over top of it, it looks pretty real. And then one of my favorite things is I want to move down a little bit. Just above this top torpedo tube opening, and just at the top of the lower one and the bottom of the lower one is like a double row of heavy rivets. And from what I could tell in a lot of pictures, those things just expelled paint like crazy, I guess due to the flow of the water over it. And then being on top of the surface and wave action and then going through, like I said, a lot of things get hit. Well, these things really would rust up along this whole row. And it may be rusty here, and then not, and then have a little rust back here, and this rust would work its way down here. Come across the top of this one, and work its way down. And then as that dries, it fades also, so it won't be as heavy as it is wet. And then like with these double hatches, and I don't know if they're hatches, they're some kind of access hatches, and around the top of that, I've always found that when you look at pictures, these things were just a pocket for now as that dries, it'll look totally different when it's totally dry. You may like it that way, or you may like it a little darker and go back with the rust or with some grime and hit it up. But as you can see, we've now got a basis for some rust and grime and paint knockoff and the undercoating showing through. I saw one U-boat where the rudders were a red oxide, so they must have not either had primer or the gray paint that they wanted to use. Maybe all they had was red oxide, still covered up all the stuff. It would be underwater, nobody would see it, so they used that. And maybe it was, I thought it was a color photo, but you know, airbrush artists and stuff back then may have touched up a black and white painting and put those in, because when they were at the dock and they saw this thing, it was done in red oxide. But now, if you get further back, and let's say you look at the saddle tanks. The saddle tanks in part of the hull have just big weld lines. And those are an instant magnet for either grime or rust due to whatever was coming off of it. So you could take a little grime, get your brush nice and wet, and maybe just hit this thing. And where they crossed would be a bigger Now when that dries out, it'll look different than what it does right now at the moment. It's being wet. We'll see if we can focus on a bit until it dries out. And then again too, somebody could have dropped something at that particular point, dark paint, grease, oil, whatever, and that was just the natural path of it going down. I can see a big difference in it now as it starts to dry out. It's nowhere near as dark and as heavy as it was, and over the next hour or two it'll even fade out even more. See if they'll let me. I don't think it's going to let me zoom in any tighter. Oop. See if I can get something focused. Let me go up here and see if I can focus. There we go. So, as you can see, as it dried, it looks far less heavy than what it did. These look far less heavy as they did. But you can still see the rust areas. And like I said, you can always go back and darken them up. And then back here, you have the grime line of some spillage or wear, whatever. And then up on the conning tower, you have the start of rust on all of the joints and stuff for the handrails. There we go. Too close to it. See if I can zoom back out a bit. Adjustment the hard way. But anyway, I don't have the best camera in the world, but anyway, a lot of people have been talking about this and saying, you know, making comments and stuff. And I just wanted to give an example. I will make other videos of this as time goes on and as I do more, and I'll show you some of the other tricks I use on some of the other parts. But right now at the moment, and let's see if I can zoom out one more time. I want to go out. It's just the basis for starting for the wear and tear and the weathering and everything else. And like I said, if you go on YouTube, you'll see some guys that do the heavy weathering, you know, like they've been out on patrol for 3 or 4 times in a row. And you'll see all kinds of amazing things done out there.